My name is Roland Vogel. I'm Executive Director of Codex, the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. Our mission is to explore ways in which information technology can be used to enhance the quality and the efficiency of our legal system. We develop legal technologies that empower all parties in the legal system and not just the legal profession per se. So this event is co-sponsored with our Center for Internet and Society. Professor Zittrain's talk falls sort of right in between, Codex's mission, which is technology for the law, and CIS's mission, which is the law of cyberspace. And so, so this seemed like a really good opportunity to co-sponsor. So with that short intro, let me introduce our speaker today, who actually hardly needs any introduction, but I'll give a quick one anyways. Professor Zittrain is professor of law at Harvard Law School, and he's also professor at the Kennedy School of Government, and he's also a computer science professor at Harvard. He's co-founder of the famous Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard, and yeah, so his research focuses on the battles for control of digital property and content, also cryptography, electronic privacy, the roles of intermediaries on the internet, human computing, and also the use of unobtrusive technology in the educational space. He sits on the board of trustees of the Internet Society, and he's also a member of the board of directors of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He's also an advisor to Scientific American. So the title of his talk today is Hacktivism, Anonymous, lulzsec, and Cybercrime in 2012 and Beyond. And Ron Dolan, our Codex fellow, actually agreed to kick off the discussion with a few probing questions for Professor Zittrain. So, so without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Roland. I thank you. I think, Ron. Depends on what happens next. But
yeah.
Why don't we start with you?
This sounds very Oprah.
I just kind of found out that that was the protocol, so it would help me then.
Well, I was happy to do, still am, kind of a more a Q&A dialogue sort of thing. I also, just in case we had nothing to talk about, brought a couple visual aids, thanks to a program called PowerPoint. You may have heard of it. It doesn't have mean transitions, but I thought I might put just a couple things on the table without turning it into a full-fledged talk, just to get things going. Does that sound like a fair balance between? Okay. So we start with the answer, then we'll do the questions that make the answer much less clear. So as I've been thinking about cyber warfare, cybersecurity, and the curious role played by hacktivism just in the past year, I thought I should share with you how I'm trying to parse that through. So I start with a bundle of things that I think I would count as important, but from a theoretical standpoint, I'm prepared to make the claim, a dangerous one, that they're not that interesting. They're difficult, they matter, but they are not totally insoluble. It's not like we know what to do, we don't know what to do about it. And I would put in that category things like the terrible things put forward in the famed movie Live Free or Die Hard. I think this is number 18 in the Die Hard series. And this is the one which features Bruce Willis as an animatronic character. But here's the classic scene where they show just how devastating a cyber attack can be.
Begin stage 1.
Yes, Traffic Control Center, Washington, D.C. Wait a minute.
Jesus Christ, it's a fire set. It's a 3-step systematic attack on the entire national infrastructure. Okay, step 1, take out all the transportation. Step 2, financial base and telecoms. Step 3, get rid of all the utilities, gas, water, electric, nuclear, pretty much anything that's run by computers, which today is almost everything.
Okay, so that sounds pretty bad if you could hear his frenetic whispering. he was talking about get rid of everything run by a computer. That would be bad. And I find myself unable to disagree with that prospect. But most of these systems are in parlance called SCADA systems, stands for no particular reason for supervisory control and data acquisition. Basically means power, utilities, dams, and yes, traffic control center, Washington, D.C., where people are hunched over keyboards making sure each light individually turns from green to red in a predetermined sequence. And the reason why I say that's important but not theoretically interesting is like, don't hook this stuff up to the internet, people. Maybe make it so that in order to open the dam, there actually has to be a guy you pay by the hour whose job is to wait by the phone, and when properly authenticated to a human he knows, goes and takes the Frankenstein switch and opens the dam. As soon as you make it so that you can open the dam from far away with a keyboard, that's kind of like what could possibly go wrong. Now, there are ways maybe to do that right, but the fact that we know what those ways are and just haven't gotten around to doing it is what to me makes this important but not as interesting for SCADA systems. And I should note in the last year, we had the first described incident in which at a utility, a certain water pump at a dam was turned on and off so often it was said to have overheated, and the commands were coming from Russia. Russia was controlling an American dam, and then it turned out actually one of the engineers was trying to diagnose it, and he happened to be in Russia at the time on vacation. So the whole thing, the retraction was on like page 37, but the story was very interesting for the time of, that it elapsed. But within this, you have the FBI, even just a few years ago, warning of such things as Assistant Director of the Cyber Division, computer attacks pose the biggest threat from a national security perspective other than a weapon of mass destruction or a bomb in one of our major cities. So like a bomb in a minor city pales next to a cyber attack. And it does, again, kind of make you wonder, what do they have in mind? And if anybody wants to talk to you about cyber warfare or even cybersecurity, it really helps to ask that person to be more specific. It's like if they want to talk to you about rights, it's okay to say which one. And that could inform your conversation later once they are more concrete. Is it about SCADA systems? If so, tell them about the Frankenstein switch. If it's about denial of service attacks, there's another thing we can talk about, and we will get to that. And if it's about data exfiltration, that's the kind of thing, too, which tends to be described as cybercrime. I love this one. The company hired by the Office of Civil Rights to conduct privacy and security compliance audits was responsible for a breach that includes the loss of a drive affecting more than 4,500 patient records. So ironic that it's like, who will leak the leakers? It's amazing to see just how poor security is, and I'm sure many of you have gotten letters of this sort at one time or another, thanks to a law in California that says if you have exposed somebody's data to a vulnerability, you need to tell them. That was like a hard-fought law to pass in California, and that's how I get letters like this, that there's been an incident involving a merchant where I used my card. The merchant, by the way, enjoys anonymity for reasons I don't understand. But in the meantime, there was compromised data, and it included my American Express card information and personal contact information. But luckily, based on their commitment to the highest level of security, they wanted to make me aware of the situation. It's like, all right, I want to know if there's anything above highest, because that doesn't seem like much. And then they say they're going to keep an eye on things. And in the meantime, they encourage me to remain vigilant over the next 12 to 24 months. So I'm just kind of waiting for this 2-year period to elapse. We're almost there, because I got to say, being vigilant for the past year and a half has taken its toll. But it's made me a better person. These kinds of things are important. They are endemic. They are chronic. But they also tend to be the sorts of things that are theoretically uninteresting. Because, you know, here's a phishing site. eBay can tell you about them. PayPal can tell you about it. Always looks like Bank of America, but wait a minute. That URL isn't Bank of America. It's ns8wisty.fr. Like, there's something not right here. But anyway, I do need to get to my account, so you put in all the information, and boom, now your account is accessed. This has theoretically been largely solved, I make the claim, because we have cool things like this. Either a token, which some of you may point out has itself been cracked, but that's a different story. But a token that if it weren't cracked would be really good, because it gives you a little number that changes every 30 seconds or so, and you need that extra number to log in, which means if you log into a phishing site with this number, and the phishing people immediately try to go over to Bank of America and use it, it will have already cycled over, and they don't actually have your password, even though what you were trying to give them was your password. And you can also do this with a mobile phone. So if there's news you can use coming out of this Q&A, right now with eBay, with PayPal, you can sign up for two-factor authentication. You can give them your mobile phone number, and every time you log in, tiny bit annoying, you will get a text message from PayPal or a poke on Facebook that will give you a 6-digit code that's the equivalent of one of these you then have to key in, which means if your PayPal password gets compromised, so long as they don't have your phone in possession too, you are okay. Great example then of, again, an important endemic problem for which great theoretical progress has already been made. Now, there are also things that are important, but that tend to sort of represent the Cyclops thrashing around with an arrow in its eye, kind of like, we know cyber war is important, we're about to get cyber attacked, but we don't know what to do. So this is from 2008. The Air Force wants a suite of hacker tools to give it access to and full control of any kind of computer there is. Remember, the motto of the Air Force is aim high. So we will be secure so long as we can make sure to access any kind of computer anywhere at any time. And I assume ... and no one else can, which can be hard in these technology platforms to make it so you get everything you want and the other guy gets nothing that he wants. And they've been doing their best to create this new cyber division. And here's the ad they actually started airing over their new cyber division.
This building will be attacked 3 million times today. Who's going to protect it? Meet Staff Sergeant Lee Jones, Air Force Cyber Command, a member of America's only cyber command, protecting us from millions of cyber threats every day. It takes Air Force technology to defend America in a changing world. U.S. Air Force, above all. Learn more about our changing world at airforce.com.
Air Force, air, space, cyberspace, because the word space is in cyberspace. And this is a little bit weird because, for one thing, the set looked an awful lot like Traffic Control Center, Washington, D.C. I think there's a single set of computers they use. They could just cycle different movies and advertisements in. It turns out several months later, they then announced they were going to suspend the provisional 8,000-man cyber command, stopping all activities. So they're getting rid of it. Here's what it looked like. This is the actual photo. This is kind of like when you get the Duncan Hines cake, and there's like the picture on the box, the serving suggestion, and then you bake the cake, and you're like, that's why I buy cake somewhere else. So this is what the actual Duncan Hines cake looks like, and I don't see Staff Sergeant Jones there, sort of, job well done. We can now be only guarded. So I call this sort of underspecified. We haven't really worked out among ourselves so well when we talk about cyber war what we mean. Is it the ability to get into any computer anytime and shut it down, to get into any computer anytime and slurp all the information out of it, or is it more government-to-government stuff? I need to break into the defense mainframe and reprogram all the battle stars to be on the side of the Cylons, that kind of thing. So that's just sort of to lay down what I think of as some of the overhypedness in the field of cyber warfare and cyber security. It feels a lot like Hollywood and not so much like reality. But I want to just jump ahead. This is the last set of things I think I'll put on the table to talk about, and let me just see if this goes where it's supposed to go here. It's supposed to be advancing to a different slide. This is what happens when you don't do it linearly. And just to talk a little bit about WikiLeaks as a gateway into talking about anonymous and anon-ops and that sort of thing. This is Julian Assange, apparently in retrospect founder of WikiLeaks. And Julian was once described by Clay Shirky as the perfect James Bond villain. All he needs is a hairless cat. And there's something to that. But what I find most interesting about WikiLeaks is not the fact that leaks happened and could be so difficult to stop, because that's kind of low tech. It's somebody apparently walked out with a bunch of information that he had access to and put it on a CD-ROM or a DVD-ROM and got it over to WikiLeaks. But more, what happened once WikiLeaks started angering a lot of the powers that be? And there were many of them, not just the US government, that were angered. And for that, first it's worth noting that they managed to fund themselves not through some bizarre set of inscrutable financial connections, but by selling T-shirts. Like that, yeah, that's kind of weird that you could have something as dodgy from a mainstream point of view as WikiLeaks selling T-shirts in order to get done what it has to get done. And when you think of like PayPal cutting off links to WikiLeaks, it's like, yes, they can't sell T-shirts anymore using PayPal. Just very strange. But the other thing you see as WikiLeaks found itself under pressure was Amazon was pressured. Moral suasion. Senator Lieberman just sort of making a press conference, a speech on the floor of the Senate about this, saying, you know, one of the mirrors at WikiLeaks should not be hosted by Amazon because it's got leaked classified information from the US government. Amazon, shame on you, take it down, and Amazon did, which started to worry the larger cloud-embracing enterprise community because they suddenly realized that there's a hidden variable. If they take something that's normally in their basement on a server and put it out to the cloud, it's quite possible then that it is vulnerable to being taken down under pressure, under acceptable use policies that they don't even really know about or think that much about, and suddenly they are cut off from their customers and their livelihood. So it's interesting to see like the Wall Street Journal worried for business once they see what's happening to WikiLeaks. But it wasn't just this. We actually saw denial of service attacks taking place against WikiLeaks. So from unknown sources, its mirrors, its main WikiLeaks server, all attacked by denial of service attacks from where we know not. And this is where Anonymous has its sort of operational spinoff, AnonOps, that decided to strike back on the side of WikiLeaks. So AnonOps then decides to go after PayPal.com and MasterCard and Amazon with denial of service attacks of their own in retaliation. And for that, they ask anybody wanting to help Anonymous to download to their little PC, which for the moment can still run any software the custodian of the PC wants, and run the low orbit ion cannon. So here's a little software you run. You just type in the IP address of the target you don't like. You click on I'm a-charging my laser, and like, away you go. You're engaging in cyber warfare. And somewhere Staff Sergeant Jones is like, I've got a bogey at 3 o'clock. This is absurd. I mean that just as a descriptive matter. It is a weird, weird thing that, like, it used to be my refrigerator. It kept my food cold. But now I'm going to use it to attack Hasbro. It's like, what? Yes, if I put this particular dough inside the fridge, it attacks Hasbro. And if enough of me does that, Hasbro won't be accepted. Like, what? Really? That's the bizarreness of a general purpose computer. Like, rarely do you buy one for the purpose of DDoSing. I mean, I know, maybe some gamers are really into it against their opponents, but for the most part, you buy it for, like, word processing, surfing the web, but then you can repurpose it to anything. Or, of course, where do other DDoSes come from? This gets repurposed without you even asking for it. You're still doing word processing, while in the background, it's charging its laser. Very, very weird state of affairs. And in the meantime, within the hacker community, you see great conflict over whether DDoSes are ever a good idea. So this is actually 2600, the Hacker Quarterly, coming out with a press release saying, we condemn denial of service attacks on all sides because hackers should believe in the free flow of information, and two wrongs don't make a right, so it's wrong to DDoS PayPal or MasterCard or Amazon just because WikiLeaks got DDoSed. Enough with the DDoSing. And then you had Richard Stallman, founder of the Free Software Movement, saying, no, certain DDoSes are actually like a sit-in at a Woolworths. It's a form of protest. It's a form of communicative speech. And trying to sort out between those two competing claims is very interesting to me. But in the meantime, you then end up with a guy who works for a firm called HPGary Federal. HPGary Federal is one of the many Beltway bandit organizations that communicates, usually individually, not through mass advertising, with any firm that doesn't want to get hacked, which tends to be many of them, and says, you should write us a check to make you less hackable. We're a security consultant. We're going to make you less hackable. Now, there are so many security consultants. Aaron Barr, the head of the firm, wanted HPGary Federal to stand out. He came up with a brilliant publicity strategy. It was, he is going to do his own operation to find out who is in Anonymous, and when he discovers who it is, he's going to tell the FT, which will then give him publicity, which will then get him clients. That from the internal corporate emails that he didn't want to have released is his motivation, apparently, in doing this. So he starts to hint at it here on February 4th of last year. And within about 12 hours, we start to see more about HPGary Federal and what it does. So this is drawn from a PowerPoint deck it had prepared to present to the Bank of America, a possible next target for WikiLeaks. And it's the services that HPGary offers. So if you want to write them a check, they can engage in computer network attack. They can do custom malware development. Why go with off-the-shelf malware when they can sort of develop something to meet your needs more specifically? And it also includes computer network exploitation, which means slurping secrets and other data off machines with persistent software implants. It sort of sounds like the kind of thing you'd sell on late-night television for people whose teeth don't work, but instead it's something they will do to get into any enemy you designate and engage in other forms of, I'm not sure what covert space-based communications are, but maybe they have a satellite. In the meantime, too, they talk about influence operations. And the influence operations are apparently their offer, like for a little extra money, to plant false information at WikiLeaks, to leak false stuff to them so that when WikiLeaks published it, they could say, look, WikiLeaks has false stuff, you can't trust them, and to go after journalists like Glenn Greenwald by trying to discredit them however possible since they had come out supportive of WikiLeaks. All right, so how do we know that this is what they were planning to do? Well, within a matter of hours after saying that he had unmasked Anonymous, Anonymous went after him. Now realize this is a security consultant who I think is pretty good at what he does procedurally. If you judge him by results, he is not pretty good at what he does. His Twitter account was promptly hacked and forced to tweet his home address and social security number. His LinkedIn was hacked. I mean, now you know you're really in trouble. Facebook gone. The parent site at HPGary, the parent company, put under such persistent DDoS attack that they can only put up this standard HTML text message that says, we have been the victims of an intentional criminal cyber attack. We are investigating, behaving appropriately. Be aware that any information currently in the public domain is not reliable because the perpetrators of this offense have intentionally falsified certain data, i.e. don't believe any PowerPoint slides you see that make us out to be evil. But then again, we're not saying they're wrong, it's just unreliable. And in the meantime, technical support can still be gotten at support@hpgary.com. I don't think I'd still be emailing them at this point for help with my security. Now the HPGary Federal site, the actual site for Aaron Barr's company, not just DDoSed, but completely taken over by Anonymous. This is what you would see if you went there. It's been seized by Anonymous under Section 14 of the Rules of the Internet. Greetings, HPGary, etc., etc. How's this for attention? And it ends with, you have blindly charged into the Anonymous hive, a hive from which you've tried to steal honey. Did you think the bees would not defend it? Well, here we are. You've angered the hive. Okay, we're getting the metaphor here. And now you are being stung. We are Anonymous, we are Legion. And at the very bottom of the page, what could make this more humiliating and worse? How about a link to a torrent of all HPGary internal private emails? So there's a link. But if you don't want to download it, you don't just have to get it from one of the mirrors. You can actually just go ahead and at this .ru address, online browse in the cloud as if it were your own Hotmail or Gmail account, all of the internal company emails and document attachments. Now that is, I have not given you the slide where the president of HPGary, the parent company to HPGary Federal, goes into the Anonymous chat room. Like there's a chat room and Anonymous is there. You're like, hello, Anonymous. And she's pleading with them not to go after HPGary. She's like trying to cut loose HPGary Federal. It's like, we're different companies, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, if you contribute to the Bradley Manning Defense Fund, we'll consider it. She's like, well, I don't know if I can do that. It's just the weirdest thing to see yourself engaging in this kind of negotiation. And then to like just put the most amazing kind of final twist on it, Anonymous itself ends up with an internal rift. And so they publish this thing saying that a former IRC operator and fellow helper named Ryan, clearly not his real name, has actually gone rogue. So he has control of anonops.ru, possibly anonops.net, we don't know. Stay away from all of our websites. They are compromised. You can't believe anything you see there. And we'll keep in touch through anonops.in, which Ryan hasn't got to yet. I don't know if you've seen Reservoir Dogs when everybody's pointing the guns at each other. It's kind of like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly for a generation that doesn't like only 3 things. And this is where I say things have kind of gone too far. So while I look at the Air Force hype and say it's hype, I look at this situation where for the first time, I think it was about a year ago, it sort of dawned on me that our information environment is one for which if you anger the wrong people, forget governments, just people, you anger the wrong people, your entire life, so long as you are not a complete Luddite, is vulnerable to doxing, to complete disclosure of everything you think is not on the internet, can be put on the internet, and anything you have on the internet that is a service is subject to hijacking and disrupting. This box in front of me has a bunch of my email on it. If Anonymous were mad enough at me, I have every confidence they would be in the contents of this box within 12 hours. Maybe if I broke it over my knee and never plugged it in again, but that's a high cost to pay for security and carries certain drawbacks that we shouldn't have to entertain. So figuring out how to navigate this territory of very real problems getting worse while not falling victim to the hype is, to me, one of the central dilemmas of things. So maybe I should stop on the presentation side of things way early here and now just open it up to discussion, questions, comments, and such, and turn to Ron to get it started.
Well, I'll ask something that I was wondering about what you consider to be hypothesis.
Yes.
Is it hacking and how do we allow
Yeah. My first thought was, it pretty much does seem like hacking to me. There's a graduate student at MIT named Molly Sauter who is just writing a paper on this subject, and she actually came up with a taxonomy that sorts between acts whose purpose is to actually prevent the target from engaging in certain activities, from actually, like if you're PayPal, from consummating PayPal transactions, distinguishing between that and acts which are meant to be mostly communicative, like taking down the PayPal website at www.paypal.com, but when you still click somewhere else to pay via PayPal, it does a deep link and it works just fine, kind of thing. And I think her suggestion is that the latter feels more communicative, should be subject to less penalty, is a little bit more like walking in front of a storefront with placards, but there are no storefronts in cyberspace. I don't know how much that distinction stands up. It'd be awfully weird if you should just have every company designate a storefront, like PayPal.in is just going to be the designated target, and if you don't like what PayPal does, take down that site or scrawl on it, but it won't disrupt the rest of PayPal's operations. That feels weird to me, but that's at least some effort to bridge the gap between Stallman and 2600. Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
well,
ports. And that's disrupting.
Yeah.
I think the penalty is simply, whatever civil disobedience, you're trespassing or blocking traffic, and it's not the same extreme level of like felony hacking.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is, in order for that to function effectively, you need everybody physically willing to go and sit there. When you're doing a denial of service attack, you have potentially even 1 or 2 people who are disrupting across the internet.
Yes.
So now the scale opens up for one person to cause an incredible amount of damage.
Agreed.
And in part, you want to see how do you balance so that you really can say you have a grassroots movement.
Correct. And I mean, I think you've nicely laid out why you could see one rationale for having tougher penalties for internet-based denial of service attacks over sitting in at a particular Bank of America branch sort of thing. But also, when you sit in at a Bank of America, the point of civil disobedience sometimes, although I'm open to correction on this, is to get arrested. It's not anonymous. You get arrested, they fingerprint you, they book you, and in a free society, they then release you and kind of forget about it later. Like we know how this transaction works, and nobody's supposed to be hit by rubber bullets in the midst of it. Here, I think they do want you to do it anonymously, hence the name of the group. which means it's a different kind of civil disobedience. It's like they don't want to pay any price, and then to make sure that if just a few fish get caught out of the teeming rivers, the idea that they go to jail for 20 years and the rest swim free, it doesn't feel like it averages out to the right amount of punishment for what may be a communicative or kind of freedom of association-based act. So I see the dilemma. Like what? Like Yelp. Just give Bank of America 1 star for crushing the 99%. Yes. Yes.
It doesn't shut down Coca-Cola, but it
Yes.
certainly allows a forum for.
I think you're right. There are alternatives that may not exist in the physical world, with the only problem being they tend not to rise high in the search engines, and they tend not to get the kind of attention, which is why you may need some headline-grabbing act, but then have the link to point people to for later. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Just wherever the mics are, yeah.
Yeah, the severity of punishments for cybercrime, the power struggles between anonymous and other entities seems analogous to life in the early American West, and we sort of solve that through consolidation of power and consolidation of control of infrastructure. So is there a way to get rid of some of this nastiness without giving the Air Force total control over every computer in the universe?
It would be like an exaggeration were it not the stated goal of the Air Force. So that is a really good question. And the way I tend to think about it is in terms of 4 quadrants that I won't bore you too much with, but basically to think of trying to think of systems, an order that can come about through systems in 4 different ways. So this one is about hierarchy and polyarchy that basically says for any given system, if you are subject to it, can you leave it or not? Do you have a choice of some alternative to what you are handed? And this one is for any particular system, not do you have a choice for another one, but to what extent as a member of the system are you also included in framing its rules and enforcement? And for most governments, because there will be a separation in anything other than a pure democracy between the people assigned that role, wearing the badges or sitting in the legislature, and the citizenry, it's going to be north of this axis. You have top-down. Much of internet development and features has come bottom-up, where there hasn't been some master industrial plan, but rather lots of different competing things with no particular skill set or certification or membership in some club or elected office privileging you to make some contribution. Anybody that can kind of write can write on Wikipedia. Anybody that can code and set up a site on the internet. And a lot of good stuff has happened down there, where in the physical world, because often there's some skill sets and privileges needed to do something big, a lot of real world innovation happens up here. So when you talk about Wild West, I don't know. You end up with a world that's down here that hasn't yet developed a lot of forms of top-down stuff. That tends to give a limit as to how much can be innovated because you don't have interstates yet. There's nobody around to make the interstate for the buggies. And you still have problems of hierarchy, that you still get some mafia that ends up running some zone of things, to mix my genre metaphors. Or you end up with a government, but then how responsive is it, blah, blah, blah. So I see responses to the Wild West problem, as you would call it, that I just described right now in the cyber context, as fitting into one of these 4 categories. And in this bottom right one, which is, hey, every person for themselves. It's bottom up, roll your own security, and if you don't like it, just go somewhere else or give it up. That's the kind of like, just get your shotgun and be vigilant for the next 12 to 24 months. And that has limitations on how well it can work. I mean, the best example of this is in 2005, right when the spammers and the virus makers got together. That's a new thing, right? That's like 2005. They were like, wow, we have some stuff we could talk about. Let's send spam with links that compromise computers that make those computers able to send more spam. Like, perfect plan. I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, oh my God, this is genius. So Harvard Law School sends a note to faculty and staff warning of an insurgence of fraudulent emails at the law school, and then they give you a huge number of things you have to know how to do so as, in just reading your email, not to have your entire computer compromised. Can you imagine? It's like, here's how to check your fruit for spots, because if you eat the spotted fruit, it's all over. Like that's just weird. So anyway, this is my favorite piece of advice. Be wary of emails that have misspellings, poor grammar, or odd characters. They are a red flag for fraud. So I wrote back. I was like, I got one. And they sent me to Oxford for 3 years. So it's very depressing. So that corner has its limited application. Up here is the government corner, right? This is who we normally turn to for a big problem. If something is on fire, volunteer fire departments, sort of part of the government, at least designated to show up, you call a fire department and they put it out. If there's some terrible thing happening in live free or die hard land, you get cops and retired cops to come help. So this form of help has been not very availing. There's been talk of legislation. It's like, yes, we need cyber legislation. So this has been a lot of controversy. The Collins-Lieberman bill talking about giving the president emergency internet power. The president, it's wonderful to read this bill. The president can declare a cyber emergency. Like, I don't mean to alarm you all, but we're in a cyber emergency. It's like, cyber what? So anyway, there was a lot of controversy over this because people thought that this bill would give the president the power in a cyber emergency to commandeer critical infrastructure, namely all of it, and even throw a kill switch or shut it down. The authors of the bill were very upset with this characterization of kill switch and pointed out that it's just not true because, after all, the president has had the authority to shut down the internet for some time under a little-known provision of the Communications Act passed 1 month after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which was an extremely far-sighted bill allowing the president. It's like, I don't know if there's going to be a global worldwide communications network, but we are under attack. I'm declaring a cyber emergency as well as war on Japan and Germany. So it turns out, though, if you actually read the Communications Act, it does grant the president the authority to shut down the internet. So in some ways it was forward-looking. So their point was, this must be doing something more. And the more, as far as I can tell, is Marines with cyber skills. So Staff Sergeant Jones from the Air Force can actually show up at an ISP and be like, everybody, there's a cyber emergency. Be better at your jobs now. That's sort of what it is, which gets to questions of, if the government's going to intervene, do they have comparative advantage? And the answer for most forms of cyber attack is no. Not all. This is not an article of faith. This is an empirical question subject to evidence. But most of the time, the answer is the people at the ISPs are already well motivated just by grudge match. These people played Zelda when they were little. Like, they want to beat the adversary. They're not going to be lazy or cowardly because, after all, it's still just computers. And having the government intervene is less clearly an advantage than it is in other instances where you would want to send the Marines. The only other idea I've seen floating around that involves really big-scale government intervention is to take some of the defenses developed at the National Security Agency to protect its own network against malware and viruses by scanning packets as they go back and forth and finding signatures within them of bad things and just killing the packets so they can't get to their destination. It's like, well, why don't we just extend the net from Fort Meade to the country and just watch packets going in and out? And if they're bad ones, kill them. There are reasons not to do that, such as unintentionally building an infrastructure for censorship that resembles China's that could be misused if we didn't have other forms of self-restraint, like the First Amendment or the Fourth Amendment, to do so, and other reasons why it might not work as a technical matter. But that's at least an example of something maybe the government could do that would be harder for ISPs individually or in a compact to come up with. So these are the sorts of things that exist in that government quadrant. But what you really get to here are some claims that just the internet should be reworked, this time by responsible public policy-driven parties. It's too important to leave to chance. And that's where you start to get proposals that say there needs to be, for instance, more built-in infrastructure to detect where bits are coming from and who they're attached to, so that we know whom to punish or blame should there be a cyber attack. And the ITU, for example, an arm of the UN, although it predates it by many years as an organization, hence its logo that looks even more old-fashioned than NASA's, the ITU, a highly structured organization, members of the ITU can only be states of the world. On the top-down, bottom-up chart, they are all the way at the tippy top. And they have come up with the idea of a focus group on next generation networks, or the FGNiGN. And they have, through this working group, said, here's what the next internet can look like to be more secure, to have more attribution in it. It's got a bunch of stuff in it, a lot of complication, not elegance, because suddenly for every bit that moves, even if somebody wants to send it and somebody else says, yes, I'd like to get it, the network in the middle should say, wait a minute, does this bit want to move? Is this bit on a bad list? I mean, some of us may remember way back in the days of credit cards being used before there was really modems. And there'd be a list that the cashier was supposed to check, like a little book, kind of like the pocket part of a law book. Does anybody remember this, or is it just me? They would literally look through the book of credit card numbers to see if it had been reported as stolen within the past 6 months. And if so, there'd be like an awkward moment at Woolworths. So this is kind of that sped up a little bit. And by the way, even if it works, it should plug into this little brown box we call the internet here in the little right corner. But other than that, that's kind of the kind of government corner. And finally, you have this third corner, which I think of as the corporate corner, because it's still top down. Corporations, we know who works there and who doesn't, right? Apple has a new building that's like a circle of Conestoga wagons, to keep your Western metaphor going. And like, you either have a badge or you don't. It's not like we are all Apple. And same for Google, same for name your company. But there are choices among them, and competition is supposed to provide solutions. And that tends to give us McAfee versus Symantec, that kind of thing. I think those are powerful but tactical. They tend not to have ability to bring large strategic change to the space. And I have a whole bunch of other problems with it, represented by a new curated computing system, because some might say, you know what the problem is? It's that you can run the low orbit ion cannon or have it run for you. That's the real problem behind DDoS. If all of the equipment in consumer hands couldn't easily run that, no more DDoS. And there's actually something to that. But what it means now with a curated computing system, if I had like the low orbit ion cannon and submitted it to the Apple store, I kind of hope they would turn it down, right? Like, what are you good for, Apple, if not to turn down the low orbit ion cannon? And that has its own implications for the freedom and future of computing. So this is all sort of to agree with you, and ultimately in my own work to ask, what solutions might lie here, alone or in combination with the other quadrants, where you have bottom-up stuff, kind of skunkworks distributed among us. Somebody in this room may have an idea for how to prevent DDoSes. One of the student groups in Ideas for a Better Internet here this term is working on that. And then try to get that deployed without trying to legislate it or utterly change the structure of the internet. Those are the kinds of solutions I'm hoping will thread the needle that you're talking about. So, where did the microphone end up? Oh, up there.
So that I actually prefer the word chaperone store than curated, if only because I think it implies something different. Curated makes you think you're getting the best things in that store.
Yes.
And it's being carefully chosen for you. Chaperone, I think, is a little bit better connotation of watching out for.
Because they are both to help you and to limit you, chaperones.
Go on analogies for a minute. The history of technology, multiple technologies. When the airplane first comes out, we don't have air traffic control systems because there's one of them. And eventually we have enough of them. And we have to go and build the machinery and rules and processes and stuff.
Yes.
And eventually we end up with international laws for, and treaties for air travel.
Yes.
When the car is invented, we don't have traffic lights and even stop signs.
Yes.
Everybody's on their own. And by the way, you carry around, like your list of warnings that you get for processing mail. Everybody actually carries around their own toolkit. Should their car break down, should something go wrong with the engine or anything else, and you have to fix everything yourself. And eventually those things get more reliable, and we also come up with other controls around them. So is it,
Yes.
is it that, do you think that this technology is fundamentally different than the other things we've done in the past, if only because the geographic reach is larger or action at a distance?
Yes.
It doesn't obey the usual laws.
Yes.
Physical things, or is it a cultural thing of how the internet and technology arose that makes us think it's very different and not amenable to that same pattern that we've seen
Yes.
in lots of other technologies?
Well, it's funny. The choice you presented was different than the one I thought you were going to give. But going with the choice you gave me, I think it's number two. I don't think it's inherent in the movement of electrons that the system that you build out of electrons be generative, be open to contribution from unaccredited strangers. We could have built something like the chaperoned app environment, not just from Apple, but Android has its own market, even with sideloading and others. We could have built that at the very beginning. In fact, we did. That's what CompuServe, Prodigy, AOL, MCImail, Minitel were. It's what many of the devoted information appliances like smart word processors were. I mean, people who don't remember the little book that they look through for credit card numbers may also not remember that you could buy a word processor, and it was just like that's what it did. And it was pretty good at what it did, but it wasn't going to be DDoSing other word processors anytime soon. It wasn't going to be running Skype, et cetera, et cetera. So because it is just contingent, it is entirely possible that we will, as a market, move ourselves, or with regulatory hints and pushing, get ourselves to a space that is very much chaperoned. And in fact, for many purposes, this is a controversial claim, I claim would be safer. I do not deny the benefits that could come from chaperoning for against the kinds of security threats we see roaming today. I just also see the problems of chaperoning. And so how do I deal with the fact that most people using technology who vote with their feet want something to be simple? They are not looking when their car breaks down to have to take it apart. Like that's a bug, not a feature. And for that, I say, how do we build systems that are still extremely simple and intuitive to use, black boxes, but that still capture the experimentalist spirit that was so important to the growth of the internet and the PC? And I do think there are answers to that question. It has to do with, for example, building systems that, should they get all messed up, can be nicely taken back to a cleaner state so that you can kind of throw your finger paint all over the room and snap your fingers and get the room clean again. And kind of the way Wikipedia, when faced with the idea of, wait a minute, you're saying anybody can edit anything. If it gets at all popular, what's to stop people from vandalizing it? And normally, most of our thought patterns would be like, yeah, this is kind of weird. We need to pre-screen entries or have certain designated people that can make contributions after they've proven themselves non-insane, non-dogs. And that would be a normal way to do it. But instead, the Wikipedians were like, no, we will default very strongly to anybody can edit, and we're just going to have a bunch of obsessive compulsive people ready to catch it as it happens. It's like a 30-second delay, no, but just within 30 seconds of live, we will pull it back. And there are enough obsessive compulsive people right now, again, not a statement of ideology, just descriptively, that will do that, aided by technological tools that let those OCD people say, this IP address has been stomping around the following dozen articles in Wikipedia. Wikipedia, revert everything this IP address has done for the past 24 hours. And except for the unusual circumstance, are we about to get bombed? No, okay, good. Except for the unusual circumstance when Wikipedia actually blocked an IP address and it turned out to be the one shared IP address used by the entire state of Qatar. So all of Qatar kicked off of Wikipedia because of one bad apple. That has seemed to work. So that's the kind of solution I would love to brainstorm about imposing on our technology. And one concrete idea that I had amplified in the book was have a red zone and a green zone on these things. So you can run pretty much any app, but untried, untrue, untested apps go into the red zone here. And if they do the equivalent of totally blowing up, they don't destroy anything in the other half of the phone. The phone just has a split personality. That's an example of trying to capture the experimentalist spirit.
It's not clear you can make the economics work on that. That is, so take a web browser like Chrome. I think their stats show that fewer than 1% of people ever hit the options page to configure anything. So eventually, they say if nobody's using it, percentage-wise, why are we going to keep developing that?
Right.
And so, to that idea as well, unless there's enough of a consumer driving force to say, I want that.
I agree. Consumers want simplicity, but they also desperately want to see the hamster dance. So when you go to hamsterdance.com, and it's like, hamster dance asks for permissions of the fine board, whatever. Allow. It's Friday night. Dance, hamster. Dance. I want the Chrome to be able to say, look, the hamster's going to dance, but if this seems at all sketchy to you, click here. And you'll still see the hamsters. You click there, it runs it in the red zone. And the hamsters can only crawl so far. That feels to me like having a two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive switch on your car, something that could have a presence on a dashboard without you having to master stick shift. There's some questions down here. Is there only one mic or two? Is it mic here? We can.
Thank you. All the examples you have given today come from mostly North America or the Western countries.
Well, I did get Qatar in there.
Right. But and I feel that most of these things happen easily in an open society. Have you heard of any significant breaches and attacks in places like China? And if it doesn't happen as much as we are aware of here, is it because of legal reason, because the society is much stricter, or is it because there's less business incentive over there to create such chaos?
Well, I have no way of reliably assessing how much more intentionally targeted attack, and by that again, let's be specific, DDoS, exfiltration of data from a particular computer, happens in a regime that, I don't know how we describe it, has more resources devoted to law enforcement, has fewer observations of due process, does not fully embrace the rule of law. I don't know, come up with your description. I can only offer some inference and hypothesis, which is a lot of the attacks that happen are indifferent to their location. The way you trawl tends to be to try to infect everything you can without regard to, it would be a lot of effort to, wait a minute, if it's in China, don't trawl. No, get everything you can and sort it out later. Or if you're trying to do a DDoS, great, get Chinese computers as well. Now, there are some statistics that say, as a source of spam of the distributed variety, Comcast for many years has held the prize for having the most computers on its network devoted to reliably sending out spam messages because presumably they've been hijacked to set up a mail server. Now, when you talk about spear phishing, particularly trying to compromise a machine either to deny its functioning or to get information out of it, is there less of that going on in China? I'd be open to hearing so, and if so, my conclusion would be there'd be some sense that the penalties, as much as they are bad, as Ron was talking about for cyber dissidentism in the US, possible 20-year felony for DDoSing somebody, Chinese are like, we can go toe-to-toe with you, don't worry. Like any number of years you come up with, we can come up with +1. So that might make somebody think twice. But also a lot of the cyber stuff we have seen in a place like China bears with it the kind of feel of malum prohibitum rather than malum in se. So for instance, if you attempt to circumvent filtering, there's something blocked you in China, you kind of try to go around it. As best as we can determine, I say it with some, pause, because times can change and it's a big country. It's not like the secret police show up on your door the day after they detect that you're using Tor. They could, they just don't. And that gets a sense of thinking of at least an internet filtering strategy as one designed of the variety, how do we put it, small fences keep in large mammals. Like we're just trying to kind of set boundaries for the 90% rather than to use it as an instrument of ferreting out who are our dissidents and can we arrest them today rather than tomorrow. They could go to that model. In fact, part of my biggest worry at the time Google was in China was that Google could get asked to apply the same kind of acumen that they do to trying to figure out exactly what sponsored ad to show you. Like that, everybody wins when you finally see something you want and you click on it. And somewhere in the world, they're like, yes, we have a live one. To put that exact matching algorithm to show me who do you think would be most receptive to an ad for a multi-party system. If you could tell me who would click on that ad, I'd be very interested, even if I'm not about to show them that ad. Instead, I'm going to send them an ad that says they've won a free iPad and they should report here at the Central Precinct on Saturday. That's the kind of thing I would actually worry about as far as data exfiltration and use of same, including data of the sort you share with like a Facebook of the world in a country that doesn't observe the rule of law. Where'd the other mic end up? Yeah, I know, but I think we're recording it for purposes that, yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question is why now? Script kiddie type things like the low orbit ion cannon have existed for 20 years now or so. But why now is it that kind of activism has become such a wide distributed, almost popular thing to become a part of? Do you think it's a generational shift or kind of a perfect storm with the economy and the wars and everything, or just like, I guess I'm just kind of curious as to why you see that being a thing now, whereas in the past it just seemed so much less prevalent.
We probably have 4chan to thank. I mean, there is a place for people out for lulz to gather and meet like-minded people, and then let's all TP this particular house kind of thing. But I don't know if that truly does justice to some of the movements we've seen under such a broad rubric of cyber activism. It might mean that people are starting to realize kind of there's an app for that. If I'm unhappy about something, there's an app to sign a petition. There's an app to post on your wall that you're unhappy about something. You can give something 1 star on Yelp, and you can participate in a DDoS. Like, that's kind of a weird-looking arrow in the quiver. I don't know how much that's gone through. If I were advising somebody who was entering the field of internet studies through survey research and that kind of thing, I think it'd be a wonderful survey to run, to actually ask people their awareness of these sorts of tools, how much they identify with them, how consistently do they think of it as something apart from them, or yeah, I don't know, if I were really upset, maybe I would download and run this. I think we've seen more DDoSing take place just because you have more and more equivalent of 18-wheelers on the information highway, namely, even like crappy computers have a lot of processing power and pretty good bandwidth. I mean, like here on the Stanford campus, you've got like 650 megabits per second of bandwidth. Like that's more bandwidth than the entire university had maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So once you have that amount of bandwidth and processing power, it's a lot easier for the same maybe determined core of people online to make a name for themselves. Now, how much PayPal and MasterCard and Amazon really suffered from these DDoSes, I'm not prepared to say they suffered a lot. The fact that they suffered at all is pretty interesting, but over the long haul, I think somebody like Amazon benefits. If you're going to set up a little website and you at all think it's going to be controversial, either because it's politically controversial and some country might attack you over it, or you're going to anger somebody, the very first thing you're going to do is try to set it up under Amazon Web Services and let them deal with it, with the only problem then being if you get a bill for bandwidth at some point for them, you don't want to pay for the bandwidth of the attack. And this also gets to why, if you set up something in your basement designed to be your own standalone server, why there's no magic box to deal with DDoS, even if that box had an instantly updated list of bad IP addresses to ignore. And it's because the amount of data you're just going to have coming in the pipe that you then successfully ignore so you can serve the real people, you're still going to get handed a bill at the end of the month that's like, oh my God, like I don't want to pay for this. And I worry systemically that we will see a convergence, thanks to the phenomenon of DDoS, a huddling of all of the, I was going to say of all of the lions to protect themselves from the hyenas, but that's just the wrong metaphor, of the baby hyenas under the sheltering baobab of Amazon to protect them from the lions of DDoS. I should just give up on this metaphor. But you know what I mean, right? The small fishing dhows are going to go under Amazon's sheltering canopy to protect themselves from pirates. And that leads to a much more fragile internet, one that is no longer as distributed as the web was designed to be. And when I think of it in Tim Berners-Lee, who's a physicist, terms, it's like this is a web designed in the best of ways for entropy, of a spreading out of energy and information. It's designed to be an answer to Zipf's law, to the 80-20 rule that, 20% of the sites get 80% of the traffic. That may be, but they could be anywhere on the net. And the idea that somehow is the universe expanding or contracting, the answer seems to be on the web maybe, it's contracting. And wherever you think you're going, it's all Duff beer at the end of the day. It's Duff Light, it's Duff this, it's just all one pipe called Amazon hosting all this stuff, which then has knock-on implications for corporate control of speech, for regulators phoning up Amazon saying, take this down, put this up. That's a real worry that's systemic, that's independent of however I feel about whether kids today like to exercise their political instincts through DDoSing. I don't know, how long do we go, Roland?
I think we're pretty much at the end of our
Should we
time.
take,
One more question here.
Oh, sure, yeah. I was about to say, actually, with regard to security, you were talking at the beginning about the Frankenstein switch and putting more people in. And I'm wondering whether whether that is a good idea given two things. One, you have sort of the first 5 minutes of war games where you have this critical moment and you leave it to sort of this random person's decision whether to
I love how
actually-
you're like, this is too Hollywoodified, but what about this Hollywood example?
Right.
Yeah.
But there's also the fact that most major hacks that we see have at least some social engineering
Yes.
component.
Yes.
So again, like HPGary Federal, the way they got root there was just they emailed from the CEO.
They pretended to be the CEO and emailed the tech guy. They were like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the root password. Is it no longer Bruce? Like, no, it's Bruce.
Right.
Yeah, that was bad.
Right. So I mean that sort of thing is usually the way.
Don't do that. If you are the top security consultant and somebody representing himself to be the CEO asks for the root password while on vacation, like, think twice. Sorry.
Right. So maybe better just to take people out of the equation entirely and just
Wait, did you see the end of War Games?
That's the way, that is the
He
counter.
fell asleep after the beginning of. He thinks the lesson of War Games is
Doc
that you need to
Walker.
take people out of the equation. Oh my God. All right, so the best is to tailor something to the function that you have. And the reason I set aside SCADA stuff in particular is because of my view that most SCADA stuff doesn't need to be generative. And my worry is that if they are floating along with everything else on the same internet, the vulnerability that's then represented will be one that says, we got to make everything safe enough to be a dam. And if your iPhone or your Android needs to be safe enough to operate a dam, it's like you can't trust Angry Birds. You can't trust Skype. Like Skype, that's from the people that made Kazaa. Remember Kazaa? It had spyware in it. Skype doesn't. Why would they put Skype? I don't know. They're from Estonia. They're from, other places. I mean, it's like, really? So I want to take the most precious eggs and put them not just in a separate basket, but like a separate universe, and be very careful about any checkpoint Charlie between the two. And the real test of that, which I don't claim to have figured out, are things like smart grid. Because ultimately, we want your thermostat to be really easy to use. How many people have gotten that new guy from Apple's thermostat that's like round and just has the temperature in it? You're like, yes, finally. Why didn't somebody think of this 50 years ago? It's like, that was the thermostat 50 years ago. But it's supposed to be smart. It's an AI. It'll make the house warm when it should be warm. It's like, good luck with that. I can't wait to see the reviews come in on this thermostat. Unless people live truly, like in jails, it might work. Because people are very, anyway, I digress. My point is, smart grid is a neat test of SCADA, because you probably do want that internet enabled so you can finally turn on the AC before you get home and have the house cold before you enter it, or something like that. That's going to be tricky when somebody can hack your AC, and you're just like, the house is cold, I don't know what to do. My blankets have been disapparated. But if you can take the most mission critical stuff, fine, give it its own controls, whatever they may be. Maybe it's a human that has to agree with an AI, and a chimp, just for good measure. It's a 3-key system. Fine. All it means is you can't open the dam as often as you would like, and maybe there's some disaster movie where it's like, we need to open it now! Somebody convince the chimp. I'm really just at time, aren't I? So the problem is that clock has said 2 o'clock for the past, that was never 2 o'clock. As they say in analog world, even a stopped watch is right twice a day, but not yet. So anyway, the key is to put in the right speed bumps specific to the application while preserving as much as possible the frictionlessness of the generative technologies where we like to double click on something and 2 minutes later have it up and running. And I have confidence that we have not yet exhausted the types of options, whole theoretical categories of options for dealing with that. And it would be a tragedy before we do that to turn to some of these other kind of quadrant solutions imported from other areas to just end the party like that. Speaking of the party, I should say, first, next Tuesday, our Ideas for a Better Internet class is presenting next door in Munger in the Paul Brest Theater. Food and cheese and wine, that's a weird Venn diagram, at 5:30, 6 o'clock for the presentations. Everybody's warmly invited, but you need to register, and there's some link available online and some obvious place for that. And I just want to thank Codex again for hosting me here while we're here for this crazy week. Thank you very much.